The Great Hall of Prime was the largest building in the known galaxy. Its walls were made of living crystal that had grown for 10,000 years. Light from twin suns passed through these walls and created rainbows that danced across the floor. Representatives from 37 different species sat in circles that rose up like steps in a stadium. Some of these beings were made of flesh and blood. Others were made of silicon and metal. A few were clouds of glowing gas held together by magnetic fields. They had all come here for one reason. They had come to decide the fate of Earth. Ambassador stood alone in the center of this great hall. She was a small woman with black hair tied back in a simple knot. Her formal robes were blue and green, the colors of her home planet. Around her neck hung a silver pendant shaped like Earth. She had worn this pendant every day since she first came to the stars as a young diplomat. Now she was 60 years old, and she had spent half her life trying to make the galaxy accept her people. Today she would learn if she had failed. The noise in the hall slowly died down. High Arbiter rose from his seat at the top of the chamber. He was nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and eyes that shimmered like black diamonds. His species had been sailing between the stars when humans were still learning to make fire. He looked down with something that might have been pity. "The vote is complete," said. His voice was translated by machines so that everyone could understand. 31 species have voted yes, 6 have voted no. The motion passes. A murmur went through the crowd. Some of the representatives looked pleased. Others looked away, unable to meet eyes. "Earth and all human colonies are hereby banished from the Galactic Assembly," continued. "You will be cut off from all trade routes. You will lose access to all communication networks. You will be removed from all protected territories. You have 1 standard year to withdraw your people beyond the outer rim. After that time, any human vessel found in assembly space will be destroyed." Stood very still. She had known this was coming. For 3 cycles, she had listened to the other species talk about humanity. They called humans dangerous. They called them unpredictable. They pointed to the wars humans had fought among themselves. They talked about how fast human colonies were spreading. They said humanity was like a disease that would infect the whole galaxy if it was not stopped. None of them understood. What they called chaos, humans called growth. What they called danger, humans called courage. What they called disease, humans called life. "Does the human representative wish to speak?" asked. Looked up at the thousands of faces watching her. She thought about all the words she could say. She thought about begging for mercy. She thought about making threats. She thought about crying. Instead, she simply nodded. "We accept the Assembly's decision," she said. Her voice was calm and clear. "But I want this body to remember something. Humanity did not come to the stars because you invited us. We built our own ships. We found our own way. When the universe was dark and empty and cold, we looked up and said we would go there anyway. You can banish us from your roads, but you cannot banish us from the stars themselves." She removed the pendant from her neck and held it up so everyone could see. "This is Earth," she said. "It is a small world. It is just a blue dot in the darkness. But it taught us something that your ancient civilizations seem to have forgotten. It taught us that life does not ask permission to exist. It simply finds a way." She put the pendant back around her neck and bowed her head slightly. "We will leave your assembly, but this is not the end of humanity. It is just the beginning of a new chapter." She turned and walked out of the great hall. No one tried to stop her. No one said goodbye. On Earth, it was night when the message arrived. Defense Minister was sitting in his office in the underground command center beneath the mountains of Province. He was an old soldier, 73 years old, with gray hair and a face full of deep lines. He had fought in 3 wars during his life. He had buried 2 sons. He had learned long ago that the universe did not care about fairness. His assistant brought him the decoded transmission from Prime, read it twice, then set it down on his desk. "Call the Joint Command," he said quietly. "Everyone now." Within an hour, the most powerful military and scientific leaders on Earth had gathered in the war room. Holographic screens showed maps of human colonies scattered across 100 star systems. Red lines showed the trade routes that would soon be closed. Blue dots showed the assembly patrol ships that would enforce the banishment. Commander was the youngest person in the room. She was only 35, but she had already commanded 3 deep space missions. Her hands were shaking with anger as she read the verdict. "This is not justice," she said. "This is murder. Without access to the trade networks, our outer colonies will starve. Without the communication arrays, we cannot coordinate our people. They are sentencing billions to death." "Yes," agreed, "they are." "Then we fight," said. "We have ships, we have weapons. We show them that humanity will not simply lie down and die." Shook his head slowly. "Our ships are fast, but their ships are faster. Our weapons are strong, but theirs are stronger. If we fight now, we will lose. And then they will not just banish us. They will destroy us completely." "Then what do we do?" asked Admiral, a tall man with a scar running down the left side of his face. "Do we simply accept this? Do we crawl into the darkness and wait to die?" Stood up from his chair. He walked to the holographic map and touched it gently. The view changed, zooming out to show the whole galaxy. The Assembly's territory was marked in gold. It covered most of the galaxy's habitable zone, but beyond that gold territory was darkness, the outer rim, the unknown. "The Assembly thinks they know everything about the galaxy," said. "They have been in power for 10,000 years. They have forgotten what it means to struggle. They have forgotten what it means to be hungry. They have forgotten what it means to be afraid." He turned to face the room. "We have not forgotten. That is our advantage. They expect us to die out there in the darkness. They expect us to fight among ourselves. They expect us to come crawling back, begging for mercy." His eyes were hard and bright. "We will do none of those things. We will go into the darkness, yes, but we will not die there. We will learn. We will build. We will grow. And when we are ready, we will return, not as beggars, not as refugees, but as something the Assembly has never seen before." "What is that?" asked. Smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Equals." The room was silent for a long moment. Then, one by one, the leaders began to nod. They understood. The vote to banish Earth had passed. The Assembly thought they had won, but they had made a terrible mistake. They had given humanity something to prove. And humanity had never failed to prove itself when the odds were against them. Far away on Prime, Ambassador boarded the last human ship to leave Assembly space. As the vessel pulled away from the crystal world, she looked back through the window at the twin suns setting behind the Great Hall. "Goodbye," she whispered, "for now." The ship turned toward the darkness of the outer rim. The stars ahead were cold and unknown, but was not afraid. She had seen the fire in Minister's message. She had heard the determination in Commander's voice. She knew that humanity would not simply disappear. The galaxy had made its choice. Now humanity would make theirs. 5 years passed in the cold darkness beyond the outer rim. The species of the Galactic Assembly did not think about humanity very often during those years. They had more important matters to consider: trade agreements, border disputes, the endless business of running a civilization that spanned 1,000,000 stars. When they did think about the banished humans, they assumed the worst had already happened: starvation, civil war, extinction. It was sad, perhaps, but it was necessary. Humanity had been too dangerous to keep. They were wrong about everything. On the frozen moon of 7, Chief Engineer worked in a laboratory buried 2 kilometers beneath the ice. She was 42 years old, thin and pale from years of working underground. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. Her hands were covered with small burns from the equipment she built. But when she smiled, her whole face lit up like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Today she was smiling. "It works," she said to her team. "It actually works." On the table in front of her sat a device no larger than a human heart. It was made of metals that did not exist in nature and crystals grown in zero gravity. Inside it, energy folded space itself like a piece of paper being bent. This was a quantum fold drive. The assembly had forbidden humans from having this technology. They said humans were too primitive to understand it. They said giving such power to such a violent species would be like giving fire to children. But had built one anyway. She had spent 3 years studying the broken pieces of a crashed assembly ship. She had figured out the principles behind the drive. Then she had made it better. The new design is 30% faster than anything the assembly uses, she told Minister over the encrypted communication channel. And we solved the energy problem. Their drives need rare minerals that only exist on a few planets. Ours can run on hydrogen fusion. We can refuel from any gas giant in the galaxy. On the screen nodded slowly. He looked older now, his hair completely white, but his eyes were still sharp. How soon can you build more? He asked. We already have, said. 12 ships are ready. 50 more will be finished by the end of the year. On another world called New, a different kind of miracle was happening. Biologists walked through fields of golden grain that stretched to the horizon. 5 years ago, this planet had been a dead rock. The soil was poison. The air was too thin to breathe. The assembly had marked it as worthless on their maps. Had looked at that dead world and seen possibility. She was a small woman with dirt under her fingernails and calluses on her hands. She had grown up on a farm in Korea before the stars were ever open to humanity. She understood something that the great scientists of the assembly had forgotten. Life did not need perfect conditions. Life only needed a chance. She had spent the first year creating bacteria that could survive in the poisoned soil. The bacteria broke down the toxins and released oxygen. The second year, she introduced simple plants that could grow in the thin air. The third year, she brought insects to pollinate the plants. By the fourth year, she was growing food. Now in the fifth year, New fed 20 million people. The assembly thought cutting us off from their food supplies would starve us, said to the young farmers who followed her through the fields. They forgot that humans have been growing food for 10,000 years. We did not need their help. We only needed time. In the shipyard's orbiting Tau, Admiral watched his fleet take shape. The ships were not beautiful. The assembly's vessels were works of art, covered in decorations and built from precious materials. Human ships looked like they had been welded together from scrap metal, which many of them had been. They were ugly and practical and tough. How many? Asked Commander, who had traveled from Earth to inspect the fleet. 300 combat vessels, replied, 2,000 support ships, and more being built every day. Studied the nearest warship through the observation window. It was covered in angular armor and bristling with weapons. Will it be enough? She asked. Against the assembly's full fleet, no, was honest about this. But we are not planning to fight their full fleet. We have a different strategy. He called up a holographic map showing the galaxy. Red dots marked assembly patrol routes. Blue dots marked human positions. The assembly has grown comfortable, he explained. They have not fought a real war in 3,000 years. Their ships are designed for parades and intimidation, not combat. Their crews train for ceremony, not battle. And their leaders have forgotten what it means to face an enemy who has nothing to lose. He pointed to a cluster of blue dots, hidden in the darkness of the outer rim. We have spent 5 years learning everything about them. Their routes, their schedules, their weaknesses. When the time comes, we will not attack their strength. We will attack their confidence. But the most important discovery of the exile years came from a quiet woman named Sumi. Dr. Sumi was She studied the languages of alien species. When humanity was banished, she had taken all the ancient databases she could carry. For 5 years, she had been reading through records that were millions of years old. One night, she found something that made her blood run cold. She requested an emergency meeting with the Leadership Council. When they gathered, she displayed her findings on the main screen. The assembly claims to represent 37 species, she said. They say they have maintained peace in the galaxy for 10,000 years. This is a lie. The screen showed images of alien beings that no one had ever seen before. Strange shapes, unknown faces, forgotten names. I found records of 12 other species, Sumi continued. Species that were spacefaring civilizations. Species that had their own languages, their own cultures, their own dreams. All of them disappeared. What happened to them? Asked who had become the leader of the Exile Council. They were erased, Sumi said. The assembly destroyed them completely. Their worlds were sterilized. Their histories were deleted. Their very names were removed from the records. I only found traces because some of the old databases were not properly cleaned. The room was silent. On the screen, the faces of the forgotten species stared out at them. Why? Finally asked. Why would the assembly do this? Because these species had one thing in common, Sumi replied. They were all expanding quickly. They were all growing in population and technology faster than the established powers liked. They were all doing exactly what humanity was doing before we were banished. Understood immediately. The assembly does not banish species because they are dangerous, she said slowly. They banish species as the first step toward destroying them. They expect us to weaken ourselves fighting for survival. Then they will come to finish the job. Yes, Sumi said. I believe that is exactly what they are planning. Minister, who had been listening via video link from Earth, spoke up. Then we have no choice, he said. We cannot simply survive out here and hope they forget about us. Eventually they will come. And when they do, we must be ready not just to defend ourselves, but to change everything. How? Asked. By showing the galaxy the truth, said. Her eyes were bright with a new purpose. The assembly rules through fear and lies. They make the younger species believe there is no alternative. But what if we could prove that the assembly has been murdering civilizations for thousands of years? What if we could show everyone that the peaceful order they believe in is built on graves? She looked around the room at the tired, determined faces of humanity's leaders. We will not just survive, she declared. We will return, and we will bring the truth with us. In the darkness of the outer rim, humanity continued to grow. Ships were built, food was harvested, weapons were designed, but most importantly, a plan was formed. The assembly had voted to banish Earth. They thought they were protecting their civilization. Instead, they had created the force that would tear it down. 7 years after the banishment, the first assembly ship disappeared. It was a patrol vessel called the Sword of. It was making its regular journey along the border of the outer rim, scanning for any sign of human activity. The captain, a reptilian being named, sent his routine report at the scheduled time. Everything was normal. The humans had probably died out years ago. That was the last anyone heard from him. 3 days later, 2 more ships vanished, then a mining station, then an entire colony on a small moon near the border. High Arbiter called an emergency meeting of the assembly. The Great Hall on Prime was filled with worried representatives. They had not felt fear like this in centuries. What is happening? Demanded the ambassador from the Silicon beings of. Our ships are disappearing without a trace. No distress signals, no wreckage, nothing. It must be the humans, said another representative, a being made of living flame contained in a magnetic sphere. They have survived somehow. Impossible, replied, though his voice was not as confident as usual. We cut them off from everything. No trade, no technology, no resources. They should have collapsed within the first year. Then explain where our ships are going, the Silicon ambassador said coldly. Could not explain. He ordered a full investigation. He sent his best scout ships to the outer rim. None of them returned. For 3 months the disappearances continued. The assembly grew more and more frightened. They increased patrols. They armed their merchant vessels. They posted guards at every station and colony near the border. It did not help. Then, on a cold morning on Prime, every screen in the galaxy lit up with a human face. Looked older now. Her black hair had streaks of gray. There were lines around her eyes that had not been there 7 years ago, but her voice was strong and clear as it echoed through the great hall where she had once stood alone. "My name is Ambassador of the Human Coalition," she said. "7 years ago you voted to banish my people. You expected us to die in the darkness. You were wrong." The representatives of the assembly watched in stunned silence as the transmission continued. "We did not die, we built. We learned, we grew stronger." The screen behind changed to show images that made the viewers gasp. Human ships, thousands of them, moving through space like schools of silver fish. The ships used drives that left no energy signature, no trail that could be tracked. Human colonies spread across worlds that the assembly had marked as uninhabitable. Factories and farms and cities that should not exist. "Your scouts found nothing because we did not want to be found," explained. "Your ships disappeared because we chose to take them. We have learned everything about your patrol routes, your communication codes, your defensive systems. We know your weaknesses better than you know them yourselves." High Arbiter rose from his seat. His forearms were trembling, though whether from fear or anger, no one could tell. "This is an act of war," he declared. "The Assembly will respond with overwhelming force. We will." "You will do nothing," interrupted. Her voice was calm but hard as steel, "because I have not finished speaking." The images on the screen changed again. Now they showed faces, alien faces, strange beings that no one in the assembly recognized. "These are the," said as one image filled the screen. They were a peaceful species of traders and explorers. 3,000 years ago, the assembly decided they were growing too quickly. Every was killed. There was burned to glass. Another image appeared. "These are the," they were beings of pure light and energy. The assembly found a way to extinguish them 2,000 years ago. More images, more names, more forgotten civilizations. The pale swimmers of, the children of the nebula, 12 species in total, all of them erased from existence because the assembly saw them as threats. In the great hall, chaos erupted. Representatives were shouting at each other. Some were demanding proof. Others were screaming that it was all lies. A few were trying to leave. But millions of beings across the galaxy were watching, and they could not look away. "We found records of these crimes in databases that your leaders thought they had destroyed," continued. "We have evidence, we have proof, and we are sharing it with every species in the galaxy right now." The transmission was everywhere, on capital worlds and remote colonies, on ships and stations and outposts. Every being with access to a screen was seeing the same thing. "The assembly does not maintain peace," said. "It maintains control, and it does so through murder." High Arbiter was shouting orders, trying to cut off the transmission, but nothing worked. Human hackers had taken control of systems that were supposed to be impossible to breach. "We are not here for revenge," said. "If we wanted revenge, we would have destroyed your border colonies instead of simply taking your ships. We would have attacked you instead of broadcasting this message." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We are here to offer you a choice, the same choice you us 7 years ago." The screen showed a new image now. A symbol, a circle containing 37 smaller circles of different sizes, all connected by lines, with a new circle being added to the pattern. "Join us in building something new," said. "A true alliance of equals, where no species is erased for growing too fast, where no civilization is destroyed for being different. Help us create a galaxy based on cooperation instead of fear." The symbol faded, and space filled the screen again. "Or refuse. Cling to your power and your secrets and your lies. Watch as the species you have oppressed for thousands of years learn the truth about what you have done." Reports were already coming in from across the galaxy, protests on a dozen worlds, client species demanding answers from their assembly masters, ships refusing to follow orders until they knew the truth. "The choice is yours," concluded. "But remember this, we spent 7 years preparing for this moment. We have ships you cannot track and weapons you cannot match. We know where you are weak and where you are strong. If you choose to fight us, we will defend ourselves, and we will win." The transmission ended. The screens went dark. In the Great Hall of Prime, High Arbiter stood in the center of the chaos. His black diamond eyes looked around at the screaming representatives, the flickering lights, the crumbling order he had spent his whole life serving. "This is impossible," he whispered to himself. They were supposed to die. But they had not died. They had done something far worse from the Assembly's perspective. They had survived. They had grown strong. And now they had returned with the one weapon the Assembly had no defense against: the truth. Across the galaxy, the younger species were waking up. They were asking questions their masters did not want to answer. They were looking at the evidence humans had provided. They were finding the same records in their own databases, records that had been hidden but not completely destroyed. On the world of the Silicon beings discovered that their ancestors had helped the Assembly erase the. They had been told it was self-defense. Now they learned it was genocide. On the flame world of Pyros, the living fire beings found evidence that they were supposed to be next on the list. The Assembly had been developing weapons specifically designed to extinguish their species. One by one, the lies of 10,000 years began to crumble. And in the darkness of the Outer Rim, Admiral received confirmation that the first phase of the plan was complete. "The message has been delivered," he said to his command staff. "Now we wait to see who chooses which side." Commander stood beside him, watching the tactical displays light up with reports from across the galaxy. "And if they choose wrong?" she asked. His face was grim but determined. "Then we show them what humanity learned in 7 years of exile. We learned that darkness is not something to fear. It is something to use. And we learned that the universe does not belong to those who have always had power. It belongs to those who are willing to fight for it." The return had begun. The galaxy would never be the same. The war lasted 18 months. By galactic standards, this was barely a blink of an eye. Wars between spacefaring civilizations usually dragged on for decades, sometimes centuries. But this war was different. This war had a purpose beyond simple conquest. Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship, the New Dawn. It was a massive vessel, ugly and angular, built from salvaged materials and human determination. Around it, 300 warships moved in perfect formation. Behind them came transport ships carrying supplies, medicine, and something even more important than weapons: truth. "Sir, we have confirmation from the fleet," reported Commander, a young woman with short black hair and quick eyes. "They are joining our formation. The Silicon beings have officially broken from the Assembly." Nodded. They had been the first to defect after learning about their ancestors' role in the genocide of the. Their guilt had driven them to humanity's side within weeks of broadcast. "What about the Pyros?" he asked. "Still deciding, but their government is in chaos. Half their population wants to join us. The other half is afraid of what the Assembly will do." "Fear," said quietly. "That has always been the Assembly's greatest weapon. We need to show them there is nothing left to fear." The human strategy was simple but devastating. Instead of attacking the assemblies, they targeted their infrastructure: communication arrays, supply stations, patrol routes. Piece by piece, they dismantled the network that held the galactic order together. But they never killed unless they had to. Every time human forces captured an assembly ship, they gave the crew a choice: join them or be set free with enough supplies to reach the nearest friendly port. Most chose freedom. But some, especially those from species that had suffered under assembly rule, chose to join. "The Admiral is being too soft," some human commanders complained. "We should be striking harder. We should be making them pay for what they did to us." But understood something that those angry voices did not. Revenge felt good, but it built nothing. The humans were not fighting to destroy the assembly. They were fighting to replace it with something better, and you cannot build a better future on a foundation of corpses. 3 months into the war, 8 species had defected to the human coalition. Another 12 had declared neutrality, refusing to fight for either side. The Assembly's coalition of 37 was shrinking every week. High Arbiter watched his empire crumbling and did not understand how it was happening. He had centuries of experience. He had the largest fleet in the galaxy. He had weapons that could crack planets open like eggs. Yet somehow, these primitive humans were winning. "They are not fighting like a proper enemy," he complained to his war council. "They strike and disappear. They capture our ships but do not destroy them. They broadcast their propaganda everywhere and our people believe it." "Perhaps," suggested one of his advisors, an elderly being from a species known for wisdom, "they are not fighting a war at all. Perhaps they are fighting an idea." "Ideas can be crushed," replied. "We have done it before." "Have we?" The advisor's eyes were sad. "Or have we simply buried ideas for a time only to have them rise again? The 12 species we erased, we thought we had destroyed their ideas along with their bodies, but the humans found those ideas. They brought them back to life. You cannot kill a truth, High Arbiter. You can only delay its arrival." Dismissed the advisor. He did not want wisdom, he wanted victory. But victory would not come. The war continued. Human ships appeared where they should not be, using their quantum-fold drives to bypass every defense. Human soldiers liberated worlds that had been under assembly control for. Human diplomats followed the soldiers, offering freedom to any species willing to take it. Ambassador traveled from world to world, meeting with leaders who had been enemies just months before. She did not threaten them. She did not demand surrender. She simply showed them the evidence of what the assembly had done, and then she asked a single question. "Is this the galaxy you want to leave to your children?" Most of them had no answer. They had grown up believing the assembly was good and necessary. They had been taught that the order of the galaxy was natural and right. Now they were learning that it was all built on bones. Some refused to accept it. They clung to the old ways because the new ways were too frightening. These species continued to fight alongside the assembly, even as their allies abandoned them one by one. But many others looked at the evidence, looked at the humans who had survived against all odds, and made a different choice. By the 15th month of the war, the assembly had lost 2/3 of its territory. Its remaining fleet was gathered above Prime, defending the capital world where the whole corrupt system had been born. Admiral brought the human coalition fleet to meet them. The battle was not even close. Human ships danced around the assembly's massive warships, targeting engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. Vessels used their silicon bodies to absorb energy blasts that would have destroyed ordinary ships. Former assembly crews who had defected provided intelligence that let the coalition anticipate every defensive move. Within 6 hours, the assembly fleet was crippled. Thousands of ships drifted in space, their weapons destroyed, their engines dead. Not a single vessel had been completely demolished. Not a single unnecessary life had been taken. Stood on the bridge of the New Dawn, looking at the tactical display. The war was essentially over. All that remained was the final step. "Open a channel to Prime," he ordered. High Arbiter appeared on the screen. He looked broken. His 4 arms hung limp at his sides. His black diamond eyes had lost their shine. "You have won," said. His voice was empty. "What do you want? Do you want to kill me? Do you want to burn our worlds as we burned the worlds of those we erased?" Shook his head slowly. If we did that, he said, we would be no better than you. Did not understand. Then what? What is the point of all this? The point, replied, is to prove that there is another way. You ruled through fear and murder. You thought that was the only path. You were wrong. He gestured, and the image of appeared beside him on the screen. We are offering you mercy, said, not because you deserve it, but because mercy is what separates us from what you were. Stand down. Accept responsibility for what the assembly has done. Help us build something new, and you will live. And if I refuse, then you will be remembered as the last tyrant of a dead empire, replied, while we will be remembered as the ones who offered you a hand and watched you slap it away. For a long moment said nothing. He looked around at the ruined fleet, at the worlds that had abandoned him, at the future he could no longer control. Then slowly he bowed his head. I accept. Across the galaxy, celebrations erupted. Species that had been enemies embraced as friends. Soldiers who had been ready to die found themselves shaking hands instead. The war was over and something new was beginning. But on the bridge of the new dawn, Commander approached Admiral with concern in her eyes. Sir, are we sure about this? After everything they did to us, the banishment, the starvation, the attempted genocide, we are just going to forgive them. Turned to face her. His face was tired but peaceful. No, he said, we are not going to forgive them. Forgiveness is something they will have to earn over many years. What we are doing is something harder than forgiveness. What is that? We are choosing to be better than our pain, he said. We are choosing to build instead of destroy. Anger is easy. Anyone can burn things down, but only the strong can build things up. The assembly never understood that. They thought power came from eliminating threats, but true power comes from turning enemies into allies. He looked out at the stars, at the galaxy that humanity had changed forever. We were banished because they feared what we might become. They were right to be afraid, but not for the reason they thought. They feared we would destroy them. Instead, we destroyed the idea that destruction was necessary, and that is a victory worth more than any war. The war was over. The reckoning was complete. Now came the hardest part of all. Building something new. 1 year after the fall of the Assembly, the Galactic Compact was signed. The ceremony took place on Earth, in the great plaza outside the rebuilt Sol spaceport. It was a warm summer day. The sky was blue and clear. Birds sang in the trees that lined the plaza. It seemed impossible that this small, ordinary world had produced the species that had just changed the entire galaxy. Representatives from 53 species had traveled across the stars to be here. Some of them had fought against humanity in the war. Some had been neutral. Some had been allies from the beginning. Now they stood together under an open sky, breathing air that smelled of grass and flowers instead of recycled atmosphere. Many of them had never experienced anything like it. It is so strange, said the ambassador from his silicon body reflecting the sunlight, to stand on a planet without walls around me, to feel wind that is not artificial. Your world is very beautiful. Dr. Sumi, who had become one of humanity's most important diplomats, smiled at him. Every world is beautiful in its own way, she said. That is what the assembly never understood. They saw differences as threats. We see them as treasures. President walked to the podium at the center of the plaza. She was 60 years old, with silver hair and kind eyes. She had been elected by humanity's scattered colonies to lead them into this new era. She had not wanted the job. She had been a teacher before the banishment, working with children in a small school inn. But her people had chosen her because she understood something that soldiers and politicians often forgot. The purpose of power was not to rule, it was to serve. Friends, she began, her voice carrying across the silent plaza, we gather here today to mark the end of one age and the beginning of another. For 10,000 years, this galaxy was ruled by fear. Species that grew too strong were erased. Civilizations that asked too many questions were silenced. The assembly called this peace. But it was not peace. It was just a different kind of war. She paused, looking out at the sea of alien faces. 9 years ago, humanity was banished from this galaxy. We were told we were too dangerous, too chaotic, too different. We were sent into the darkness beyond the outer rim to die. In the crowd, Ambassador stood beside former High Arbiter. The old had requested asylum on Earth after the war. He could not face his own people, not after everything that had been revealed about what the Assembly had done, had argued for accepting him. Mercy, she said, was not just for those who deserved it. But we did not die, President continued. We did what humanity has always done when faced with impossible odds. We refused to give up. We found ways to survive. We built new technologies. We grew our own food. We raised our children to believe in a better future. She smiled and warmth spread through the crowd. And when we were strong enough, we came back, not for revenge, not for conquest, but to show the galaxy that there was another way to live. The document was brought forward on a floating platform. It was written on paper, actual paper made from trees, because humans believed some things should be physical, touchable, real. The Galactic Compact is not a treaty between rulers, explained. It is a promise between peoples, a promise that no species will be erased for being different, a promise that every civilization will have the chance to grow and learn and make mistakes, a promise that disputes will be settled with words, not weapons. One by one, the representatives came forward to sign. The ambassador left a pattern of light on the paper. The being from Pyros touched it with a carefully controlled flame. Aquatic species used water-based inks. Silicon species used mineral compounds. Each signature was unique, just like the species that made it. When it was done, President held up the document for everyone to see. This is not the end of our journey, she said. It is the beginning. We will make mistakes. We will disagree. There will be conflicts and challenges and moments when we want to go back to the old ways. But we must remember why we are here. We are here because we believe the universe is big enough for everyone. We are here because we choose hope over fear. The crowd erupted in applause. Cheers in 100 different languages filled the air. Beings who had been enemies embraced as friends. The future, for the first time in 10,000 years, felt open. After the ceremony, as the sun began to set over Seoul, found herself walking alone through the gardens near the spaceport. The flowers were in bloom. The air was sweet. She could hear music and laughter from the celebration happening nearby. She stopped beside a small pond and looked at her reflection in the water. She was 70 years old now. Her hair was more gray than black. Her face was lined with years of struggle and worry and hope. Having second thoughts, a voice asked. She turned to find Dr. Sumi approaching, the historian who had uncovered the Assembly's darkest secrets, the woman whose discovery had changed everything. No, replied, just remembering. When I stood in that great hall on Prime when they voted to banish us, I thought my life's work was destroyed. I thought everything I had fought for was lost. And now, looked up at the sky. The first stars were appearing as darkness fell. Somewhere among those stars were the world she had helped liberate, the species she had helped unite, the future she had helped create. Now I know that was not the end, she said. It was not even the beginning of the end. It was just the end of the beginning. Sumi stood beside her, watching the stars multiply in the darkening sky. Do you think it will last? She asked. The compact, I mean the peace, will it survive? Considered the question. It was a fair one. History was full of alliances that had failed, treaties that had been broken, promises that had been forgotten. I do not know, she admitted. Humans are good at many things, but we are not perfect. Neither are any of the other species in the compact. There will be problems. There will be setbacks. There will be moments when the whole thing seems ready to collapse. That does not sound very hopeful. smiled. "But here is what I do know. We survived the darkness. We built something from nothing. We faced an empire that had ruled for 10,000 years, and we showed them another way. If we can do that, we can do anything." She reached up and touched the silver pendant around her neck, the same pendant she had worn in the Great Hall when the vote was announced. Earth, her small, beautiful, stubborn home. "The Assembly believed that order required control," she said. "They believed that peace required silence. They believed that survival required the destruction of anyone who was different. We proved them wrong. And as long as there are people who remember that lesson, the compact will survive." Above them, the lights of ships from 100 worlds moved across the night sky. They were heading in every direction. Some were going home to share news of the signing. Others were exploring territories that had been forbidden for. A few were traveling to worlds that no one had ever visited before. The galaxy was open in a way it had never been before. "Come," said, taking Sumi's arm. "The celebration is still going, and I think we have earned a drink." They walked back toward the lights and the music. Behind them, the stars continued to shine as they had for billions of years. But now, for the first time, they shone on a galaxy that was free. The vote to banish Earth had been approved 9 years ago. The galaxy had expected humanity to disappear. Instead, humanity had redefined what the galaxy could become. And this was not the end of the story. It was not even the middle. It was just the first chapter of something much larger, something that would continue for generations, something that would spread to every corner of the universe. Because that was what humanity did. They survived, they built, they reached for the stars. And they never, ever gave up.